The machines beeping beside my hospital bed were the only proof I was still alive. But in that frozen body, my mind was wide awake. I heard everything, the doctor's grim predictions, the nurse's pity, and worst of all, my daughter Emily's voice breaking as she said those words that shattered my heart. Stop treatment. Mom wouldn't want to live like this. My own child gave up on me. The daughter I raised alone after Robert died, the one I worked double shifts for, the one whose college tuition emptied my savings. She stood there deciding my fate while I screamed inside a body that wouldn't move. For 3 months I lay trapped in silence as they discussed selling my house and dividing my things. They thought I was gone, but I heard every word, felt every betrayal. Then my finger twitched. That tiny movement changed everything. Now I'm awake, I remember, and Emily has no idea that I know what she did. I still had dirt under my fingernails from the garden when everything changed. Robert used to tease me about that, how I'd come inside after hours among my roses with soil traced into the lines of my palms like some earthy fortune teller. Since losing him 3 years ago, the garden had become my sanctuary. At 67, I'd finally found my rhythm again in the quiet aftermath of widowhood. Grandma, are you ready? My grandson Jake poked his head through the patio door, mortarboard tilted rakishly on his head. Mom says everyone's waiting. I brushed the soil from my hands and smiled. Just give me 5 minutes to change. Can't give a speech looking like I've been excavating treasures. The backyard was transformed for Jake's graduation party, white folding chairs, blue balloons, and a banner proclaiming "Congratulations, graduate." Emily, my daughter, had organized everything to perfection as usual. Ever since she was a little girl, Emily had been my planner, my practical one. Michael, my son, was the dreamer, just like his father. Mom, there you are. Emily rushed over, clipboard in hand. Speech time in 10 minutes. Dad's old watch is on your dresser if you want to wear it. I nodded, touched by her thoughtfulness. Robert's watch had become my talisman for important moments. As I headed upstairs to change, I paused at the travel brochure on my nightstand. Paris in autumn. The trip Robert and I had always promised ourselves but never taken. Next month, I'd finally go, a gift to myself after decades of putting everyone else first. The weight of the watch felt comforting against my wrist as I descended the stairs. The house buzzed with conversation and laughter. I caught Michael's eye across the room, and he gave me a quick thumbs up. At the makeshift podium, actually just a music stand Emily had repurposed, I unfolded my notes and looked out at the faces of people who made up the tapestry of our family life. When Jake was just 4 years old, he announced to the entire grocery store that he was going to build rockets when he grew up. The cashier asked if he meant toy rockets, and Jake, the words suddenly felt distant, as if they were being spoken by someone else. A peculiar heaviness pressed against my temples. The note cards trembled in my hands. Something was wrong. The faces before me blurred into watercolor smudges. Was I too hot? I reached for the glass of water on the stand, but my right arm wouldn't respond properly. The glass tipped, water splashing across my notes. Mom, Emily's voice sounded concerned. Are you okay? I tried to reassure her I was fine, just a little dizzy, but the words came out garbled, as if my tongue had swollen to twice its size. Panic fluttered in my chest. What was happening? The room tilted sideways. I heard gasps, felt hands reaching for me, saw Emily's frightened face looming close, then nothing but darkness and fragments. Sirens, the rough texture of a stretcher beneath me. A paramedic's voice, stroke alert. Woman 67. I was floating in and out of awareness. Every time I surfaced, I tried to speak, to move, but my body refused to cooperate. This couldn't be happening, not now, not when I was finally living again. BP 190/110, someone called out. Martha, can you hear me? A penlight flashed across my eyes. I wanted to scream yes. Yes, I can hear you. But my lips wouldn't form the words. The emergency room was a kaleidoscope of faces and voices. They cut away my blouse, the new one I'd bought specially for Jake's graduation. The indignity of it struck me even through the fear. Tests, needles, the cold gel of an ultrasound on my neck. Large vessel occlusion, a doctor said. We need to get her to Comprehensive Stroke Center stat. Another ambulance, more sirens. I fought to stay present, focusing on the ceiling of the vehicle, counting the seconds between the wails. 67 years of a heart beating without incident, and now this betrayal. My body was a familiar neighborhood suddenly rendered foreign. At the new hospital, everything accelerated. Scans, lights, voices layered over one another. Time is brain, someone said. Emily appeared beside me, her mascara smudged down her cheeks. Mom, I'm here, you're going to be okay. She gripped my left hand, the only part of me that seemed to register touch correctly. I tried to squeeze back but couldn't tell if I'd succeeded. Are you her daughter? A doctor with kind eyes addressed Emily. We need to discuss intervention options immediately. They disappeared, leaving me alone with a nurse who efficiently checked monitors and IVs. I strained to hear Emily and the doctor talking just outside the door. Massive ischemic stroke, clot retrieval procedure, risks of hemorrhage, no guarantees. Emily's voice broke as she said, "Do whatever you need to save her." The procedure was a blur of semi-consciousness. I remember the cool antiseptic smell of the surgical suite. The strange detachment of being awake yet separate from what was happening to my body. A doctor narrating as they threaded something through my blood vessels, trying to capture the clot that had stolen my speech, my movement, my autonomy. Afterward, I drifted in a haze of medication and exhaustion. The stroke unit was never fully dark or quiet. Nurses came and went. Doctors spoke in hushed tones. My children took turns sitting vigil. The full impact didn't register until the neurologist stood at the foot of my bed with my family gathered around. I could hear perfectly, could understand every word, but my body remained a prison, refusing most commands to move or speak. The damage is extensive, he explained, his voice gentle but clinical. The stroke affected a significant portion of her right hemisphere. While she seems to have moments of awareness, the EEG shows minimal higher brain activity. What does that mean for recovery? Michael's voice was strained. I'm afraid the prognosis is poor. Less than 5% of patients with this pattern of injury regain meaningful function. She may remain in a minimally conscious state indefinitely. I screamed inside my head. No, I'm here, I can think, I understand, but not a muscle move to betray my internal protest. What do we do? Emily asked, and I could hear the tremor in her voice, the same one she'd had as a little girl when asked to decide something too big for her. We'll continue supportive care, the doctor explained. But it would be appropriate to discuss what your mother would want in this situation, whether continuing aggressive medical intervention aligns with her wishes. The room went quiet. In that silence, my entire world contracted to a single terrible realization. My children were being asked to decide whether my life was worth continuing. And I had no way to tell them I was still here. Days passed in a hazy torment. If you've never been trapped inside your own body, there's no way to describe the horror. My mind remained sharp while my flesh betrayed me. I could think, feel, understand everything, but express nothing. The doctors called it locked-in syndrome, though they didn't realize that's what I had. To them, I was just another stroke victim with minimal brain activity. The hospital room became my universe. Beige walls, fluorescent lights that never fully darkened, the rhythmic beeping of monitors that tracked a life I could no longer control. Every 4 hours, nurses came to reposition my body to prevent bed sores, their hands gentle but impersonal as they moved limbs that had become foreign appendages. Martha, I'm going to turn you now, they would say, though they didn't expect me to understand. But I did understand. Every word, every conversation, every devastating medical assessment. Emily and Michael took turns at my bedside. Michael read aloud from my favorite mystery novels, his voice catching sometimes when he reached a part he knew I'd enjoy. Emily was more practical, managing medical paperwork and discussing treatment options with doctors. Their approaches reflected who they'd always been, Michael the sentimental one, Emily the pragmatist. 1 week after my stroke, the neurologist requested a family meeting. They gathered in my room, Emily, Michael, and Dr. Patel, thinking I was merely an empty vessel in the bed beside them. The latest scans show no improvement, Dr. Patel explained. The damage to her brain is extensive, but she could still recover, right? Michael's voice held desperate hope. People wake up from these things. Dr. Patel's silence spoke volumes before his words did. It's possible, but extremely unlikely given the pattern of injury. At this point, we need to discuss realistic expectations and long-term care options. What exactly are you saying? Emily asked, her voice tight. I'm saying that your mother may never regain consciousness as you knew it. She may remain in this minimally conscious state indefinitely. Michael made a choked sound. So we just wait. For how long? That's what we need to discuss. Dr. Patel's voice softened. Many families in this situation consider what their loved one would want, whether continuing aggressive medical intervention aligns with their wishes about quality of life. The room went silent. Inside my prison, I screamed, "I'm here, don't give up on me." Mom and I talked about this once, Emily said finally. After Dad died, she said she wouldn't want extraordinary measures if there was no hope of meaningful recovery. No. That conversation had been theoretical, philosophical, not about this. Not about being conscious but unable to communicate. Define meaningful recovery, Michael demanded. Independence, communication, awareness. Dr. Patel's clinical assessment cut through me. Based on the extent of damage, those outcomes are highly improbable. So we're supposed to just let her die? Michael's voice broke. It's not about letting her die, Emily said. It's about respecting what she would want. Mom was always independent. She wouldn't want to live like this. Rage and terror coursed through me. How dare she presume? How dare she speak for me when I couldn't speak for myself? I concentrated every ounce of will into moving anything, a finger, an eyelid. Nothing responded. I need more time, Michael said. I can't make this decision today. Dr. Patel nodded. Take the time you need. We'll continue supportive care meanwhile. For 3 days, my children argued by my bedside, thinking I couldn't hear. Michael wanted to wait to give me every chance. Emily believed she was honoring my wishes by letting me go. I remained trapped, a silent witness to my own fate being decided. On the 4th day, they reached a fragile consensus. Michael sat beside me, holding my limp hand. Mom, if you can hear me, I want you to know we love you. We're trying to do what's right. His tears fell onto my skin. I felt each one. An hour later, Dr. Patel returned with a social worker. They spoke of comfort care, of letting nature take its course, of dignity. Then Emily uttered the words that would haunt us both. Stop treatment. Mom wouldn't want to live like this. The betrayal cut deeper than any stroke. My own daughter sentencing me to death. All while I screamed silently, locked in the prison of my unresponsive body. They discontinued the IV medications that had been supporting my blood pressure. Removed the feeding tube. Kept only the morphine for comfort. As if I could be comfortable knowing my children had given up on me. It may take several days, the nurse explained gently to Emily. We'll make sure she's comfortable. But a strange thing happened. Without the medications suppressing my nervous system, tiny fragments of control began returning. Not enough for anyone to notice. A flutter of an eyelid, a twitch of a finger when no one was watching. My vital signs stabilized without intervention. After a week, the doctors seemed puzzled. She stabilized on her own, Dr. Patel told my children. But this doesn't change the overall prognosis. She remains in a minimally conscious state. They moved me to a long-term care facility, a place for people to die slowly. My room there was shared with another stroke patient, separated by a thin curtain. The nurses were kind but harried, caring for too many patients with too few resources. Emily visited weekly, sitting stiffly by my bed, giving updates on Jake's college plans and her work. Michael came daily, still reading books, still believing I could hear him. He was right. I know you're in there, Mom, he whispered one evening. I'm not giving up. The weeks blurred together. I developed a urinary tract infection that went unnoticed until I spiked a fever. Pneumonia followed. My body fought while my children were called to say goodbye again. She's a fighter, a nurse told Emily. Most patients in her condition wouldn't have survived these complications. Emily looked at my withered form. Is she suffering? Is it cruel to let this continue? There's no way to know what she's experiencing, the nurse answered. Oh, but there was. I was experiencing everything, every indignity, every moment of my children discussing me as if I were already gone. Every betrayal. 3 months after my stroke, a new night nurse was assigned to my room. Camille. Unlike the others, she spoke to me directly, not around me. "Mrs. Fletcher, I'm going to change your position now," she'd say, her hands gentle as she moved me. "Let me know if anything hurts." Then she'd laugh softly. "I know you can't actually tell me, but I like to think you might someday." She was humming one night while checking my vitals when she asked absently, "Do you like this song, Mrs. Fletcher? Squeeze my hand if you do." I focused every particle of my being into my right hand where hers rested. And for the first time in 3 months, my finger moved, wrapping weakly around hers. Camille froze. "Mrs. Fletcher, did you just squeeze my hand?" I did it again, a tiny movement, but unmistakable. "Oh my God," she whispered. Then louder, "Oh my God." She ran into the hallway, calling for the charge nurse. She squeezed my hand. She responded to a direct question. Tests followed. Specialists were called. And slowly, agonizingly slowly, more control returned. An eye blink in response to questions. A finger moved on command. The doctors were baffled but could no longer deny I was conscious. "It's extremely rare," the new neurologist explained to my astonished children. "But it appears your mother has been aware this entire time. She was locked in conscious but unable to communicate." Emily went pale. The whole time, she could hear us. The question hung in the air between us as I managed, for the first time, to hold her gaze directly. The revelation that I had been conscious the entire time changed everything. The medical team that had nearly ripped me off now swarmed around my bed, conducting tests, documenting every twitch and blink as if they were miracles. And perhaps they were. Dr. Brannigan, a neurologist specializing in disorders of consciousness, was called in to assess me. "This is remarkable," he said, reviewing my charts. "Mrs. Fletcher appears to have been in a locked-in state all along. Her cognitive function is intact, but the stroke damaged the motor pathways necessary for movement and speech." I wanted to scream, "Yes, that's what I've been trying to tell you for months." But even now, communication was painstaking. One blink for yes, two for no. A squeeze of a finger. Exhausting efforts that yielded minimal results. Camille became my champion. She created a letter board that allowed me to spell words by indicating rows and columns with eye movements. It took 20 minutes to spell water, but it was communication, the first real connection I'd had with the outside world in months. My children reacted differently to the news. Michael was overjoyed, vindicated in his refusal to give up hope. Emily was devastated. She avoided my gaze, spoke only to the doctors, and left the room whenever the neurologist mentioned my level of awareness during the past months. "She's processing," Michael explained after Emily rushed out during a therapy session. "It's a lot to take in." A lot to take in. Yes, discovering the mother whose treatment you discontinued had heard every word, felt every moment of abandonment. That would be a lot to take in. What Michael didn't know, what no one knew except me, was that during those silent months I had become a witness to the dismantling of my life. Visitors brought news they assumed I couldn't comprehend. My sister Diane visited weekly, using my bedside as a confessional. "They're selling your house," she told me one Tuesday afternoon, applying coral lipstick that had been outdated since the 90s. "Emily says it makes sense with the medical bills and all." Michael disagreed, but you know how he always gives in to her. My house. The home Robert and I had bought 40 years ago. The garden I'd lovingly tended, all to be liquidated while I lay helpless. Diane's visits continued, each bringing new revelations. "They divided up your jewelry last weekend. Emily took Mom's pearls, which I thought was presumptuous, but what could I say? Michael just wanted that old watch of Robert's. The rest is going to auction. My possessions, my memories. Distributed as if I were already dead. But the worst betrayal came during a hushed conversation between my children and what they thought was my sleeping presence. The account access finally came through, Emily said. "We should move the money before the next round of bills hits." "Is that legal?" Michael sounded uncertain. "Mom's not dead. The power of attorney gives us full financial control." The lawyer said it's fine. Emily's voice took on the clipped tone she used when brooking no argument. Besides, the neurologist says she'll never recover. This is just practical. The power of attorney. A document I'd signed after Robert died, trusting my children to act in my best interest if I ever became incapacitated. Never imagining they would use it against me. Never imagining Emily, my practical one, would decide my life wasn't worth the expense of maintaining it. The daily parade of indignities continued. Physical therapists moved my limbs mechanically to prevent contractures, discussing weekend plans over my body. A nurse's aide complained about her boyfriend while changing my catheter bag. Dr. Weiss, who checked on me twice weekly, spoke to the nurses about my vegetative state while standing at the foot of my bed. Only Michael and Camille treated me like a person still present. Michael brought photos of Jake's college dorm room, describing campus visits and orientation. "He's doing well, Mom. He misses you," says his roommate snores worse than Dad did. The comparison to Robert always made him smile, though the edges were tinged with sadness. Camille worked with me tirelessly on communication. "You're in there, Mrs. Fletcher. We just need to find your way out." 3 months after my stroke, my world consisted of ceiling tiles I'd memorized, the sounds of other patients moaning, and the slow realization that my life as I knew it was over. My house sold. My possessions distributed. My savings being managed by the daughter who had been ready to let me die. Then came the miracle. The finger twitch that Camille noticed, followed by intentional eye blinks, then small hand movements, each tiny victory celebrated as if I'd climbed Mount Everest. "She's responding to commands," Dr. Brannigan confirmed after running tests. "This indicates higher cognitive function than previously assessed." The specialists called it emerging from minimally conscious state, but to me, it wasn't emergence. It was finally being seen after months of invisibility. Rehabilitation began in earnest. Speech therapists, occupational therapists, physical therapists who now spoke to me instead of over me. Each session exhausting, but a step toward reclaiming some fragment of my former self. 6 weeks after that first finger twitch, I managed my first audible word. Water. Rough, barely recognizable. But my own voice, Camille cried. The doctor made notes. Michael called Emily, who had been coming less frequently as my responsiveness increased. "Mom spoke," he told her. "She asked for water." When the speech pathologist asked what I remembered from the past months, all eyes in the room focused on me. Would I reveal that I'd heard everything? That I knew about the house, the finances, the decision to stop treatment? I pushed my lips into the approximation of a word. Everything. The therapist glanced at the doctor, who stepped closer. "Mrs. Fletcher, can you elaborate on what you remember?" With painful slowness, I formed each word. "Heard everything you said." The color drained from the doctor's face. He cleared his throat. "Are you saying you were conscious during your time in the minimally conscious state?" One blink. "Yes, you could hear conversations around you." One blink. "Did you understand what was happening to you?" One blink. The implications hung in the air. Every conversation, every decision, every betrayal. I had witnessed it all, imprisoned in silence. "I need to speak with the family," the doctor said quietly to the therapist. "They need to be prepared for what this means." What it meant was accountability. What it meant was Emily facing the knowledge that I had heard her give up on me. What it meant was confronting the fact that while I lay unable to protest, my life had been dismantled piece by piece. The next day, Emily and Michael were called to a meeting with Dr. Brannigan. I wasn't present, but Camille told me later that Emily had broken down completely when told I remembered everything from my time in the locked-in state. "She kept asking if you could have heard when they discontinued treatment," Camille whispered. The doctor confirmed it was likely. She left in tears. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt hollow. The daughter I'd raised, who I'd thought would fight for me until the end, had instead become the architect of what was nearly my end. The betrayal was absolute. When Emily finally came to see me, her eyes were swollen from crying. She stood at the doorway as if afraid to enter. "Mom," she said, voice barely audible. "Can I come in?" I blinked once. Yes, but as she approached my bed, I knew nothing would ever be the same between us again. Some voices once heard can never be unheard. Some betrayals cut too deep for simple forgiveness. The road to recovery stretched before me long and uncertain. But one thing was clear: I would reclaim what was left of my life. And when I was strong enough, there would be a reckoning. The day I spoke my first word was the beginning of a slow, excruciating rebirth. Each small victory felt monumental, a finger lifting on command, my head turning toward a sound, lips forming simple words. Rehabilitation consumed every waking hour. Speech therapy in the mornings, physical therapy in the afternoons, occupational therapy whenever I had strength left. The exhaustion was bone deep, but I pushed through it, driven by determination and, if I'm honest, by rage. Dr. Brannigan called my recovery remarkable and unprecedented. The medical team documented everything, turning me into a case study for journals and conferences. My neural pathways were forging new connections, bypassing damaged areas in ways they hadn't thought possible. I became a medical curiosity, a miracle patient who defied expectations. The human brain is remarkably plastic, Dr. Brannigan explained during rounds one morning. Mrs. Fletcher is demonstrating extraordinary neuroplasticity. I wanted to tell him it wasn't my brain that was extraordinary, it was my will. The sheer force of determination to reclaim my life, to hold my children accountable, to make Emily face what she had done. That was what pushed me forward when my body screamed to stop. 6 weeks into rehabilitation, I could form short sentences, though my speech remained slurred and required intense concentration. "How long until home?" I asked Dr. Brannigan during an evaluation. His expression turned cautious. "That depends on several factors: your continued progress establishing appropriate home care, accessibility modifications." "My house sold," I managed to say. He looked uncomfortable. "Yes, I understand there have been some changes during your illness. Your son mentioned you'll be staying with him when discharged." Michael had moved my photo albums and a few personal items to his guest room. The rest of my possessions, the things that hadn't been sold or distributed, were in storage. The life I'd built over 67 years reduced to boxes in a warehouse. When Emily visited, conversation remained painfully stilted. She brought flowers, magazines, trivial updates about weather and neighbors, anything to avoid addressing the elephant in the room. I could see the guilt eating at her, the way she flinched whenever I struggled to speak, as if each labored word reminded her that she'd been prepared to silence me forever. One afternoon, during a particularly strained visit, I decided enough was enough. "Why?" I asked simply. Emily looked up from the magazine she'd been flipping through. "Why what, Mom? Why give up on me?" Her face crumpled. She set the magazine aside, hands trembling. "The doctors said there was no hope. That you'd never recover consciousness or function. They said you wouldn't want to live that way." "You decided," I said, each word deliberate. "I thought I was honoring your wishes." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "After Dad died, you said you wouldn't want extraordinary measures. You said you'd rather go quickly than linger." "I was conscious," I reminded her. "Heard everything." "I didn't know that," she whispered. "None of us did. The tests showed minimal brain activity. You sold my house." The accusation hung between us. Emily wiped her eyes. "The medical bills were enormous. Your insurance only covered so much. We needed funds for your long-term care." "My savings?" She couldn't meet my eyes. "We established a trust for your care. Michael manages it." That at least was something. Michael, who had never given up on me, who had read to me when others had written me off, was in charge of whatever remained of my finances. But the betrayal still cut deep. While I lay unable to advocate for myself, my life had been dismantled piece by piece. I didn't want Emily's tears or excuses. I wanted accountability. I wanted her to acknowledge that she had been wrong, not just about my prognosis, but about giving up so easily. 2 months after I spoke my first word, I graduated from liquids to soft foods. The simple act of swallowing applesauce without choking felt like summiting Everest. My right arm had regained about 30% function, enough to feed myself with adaptive utensils. My right leg remained stubbornly unresponsive. "You're making extraordinary progress," Dr. Brannigan told me during an evaluation. "But I want to set realistic expectations. Some deficits may be permanent." I nodded, having already reached that conclusion myself. The woman who attended roses and planned trips to Paris was gone. In her place was this new version of Martha Fletcher, one who measured success by the ability to feed herself, to form complete sentences, to use the bathroom with minimal assistance. Yet even as I mourned that loss, I found unexpected strength in this new self. I had survived abandonment. I had clawed my way back from the edge of oblivion through sheer force of will. Whatever came next, I would face it with the same determination. Camille continued to be my strongest advocate, even after I transferred to the rehabilitation center. She visited on her days off, bringing books and news from outside the clinical bubble that had become my world. "Your son called the facility today," she told me during one visit. "They're preparing for a family meeting about your discharge plan." "When?" I asked. "Next week. They think you'll be ready for outpatient services soon." The prospect of leaving the rehabilitation center filled me with equal parts hope and anxiety. Hope for reclaiming some independence, anxiety about facing a world that had continued without me. About living with Michael, dependent on the child who had once depended on me. The family meeting was scheduled for Tuesday afternoon. Dr. Brannigan, the rehabilitation team, Michael, and Emily gathered in the conference room to discuss my future. I insisted on being present, wheeled in by an aide, determined to have a voice in decisions that would shape the rest of my life. "Mrs. Fletcher has made remarkable progress," Dr. Brannigan began. "While she continues to have significant deficits, particularly in her right side mobility, her cognitive function is excellent and her speech has improved substantially. The occupational therapist outlined equipment I would need: a wheelchair, a hospital bed, grab bars in the bathroom. The physical therapist recommended continued outpatient therapy 3 times weekly. The social worker discussed home health aid options. Throughout the meeting, Emily sat stiffly, taking notes but barely speaking. Michael asked questions, clarified details, reviewed the care plan with thoughtful attention. When the team had finished their presentations, Dr. Brannigan turned to me. "Mrs. Fletcher, do you have any questions or concerns about the discharge plan?" I gathered my strength, focusing on forming clear words. "I want to know what happened to my things, all of them, every item from my house." The room fell silent. The medical team exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Mom," Michael began gently, "we can discuss that later privately." "No," I said firmly. "Now I want to know what's left of my life." Emily cleared her throat. "Most of your furniture was sold. Your clothes are at Michael's. Your jewelry was divided between family members, except for a few pieces in the safety deposit box. Your china went to cousin Sarah. The rest is in storage." Each loss felt like another small death. The dining table where we'd gathered for Sunday dinners. The reading chair by the window that had been my sanctuary. The Christmas ornaments collected over decades. "And my money?" I pressed. Michael answered this time. "Your house sold for $350,000. After paying off the remaining mortgage and medical bills, we established a care trust with the remaining $200,000. Your retirement accounts remain untouched, about $180,000. Your checking and savings were used for immediate expenses. Half of what I'd worked my entire life to build gone in 3 months, but it could have been worse. At least I wasn't destitute." "I want control," I said, looking directly at Dr. Brannigan. "Of my money, my decisions, everything." "That would require revoking the current power of attorney," he explained carefully. "Given your cognitive recovery, that's certainly possible, but would require legal steps." "Then we take those steps," I said firmly. Emily looked stricken. "Mom, we were just trying to take care of things, to take care of you." The words I'd been holding back finally broke free. "You gave up on me, you all did except Michael and Camille. You were ready to let me die. You sold my house, divided my things. Took control of my money, all while I was there, hearing everything." Tears streamed down Emily's face. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." "Sorry doesn't bring back my house," I said. "My garden, my independence." Dr. Brannigan intervened gently. "Perhaps we should conclude the medical portion of this meeting. These family matters can be addressed privately." But I wasn't finished. "I have one more question for the doctor." I turned to face him directly. What are my rights as someone who recovered? Who was conscious when treatment was withdrawn? What legal recourse do I have? The question hung in the air, laden with implication. I wasn't just asking about power of attorney. I was asking about accountability, about consequences for decisions that had nearly ended my life. Dr. Brannigan chose his words carefully. There are legal avenues to address these concerns. I would recommend consulting with an elder law attorney who specializes in medical cases. Emily made a small, wounded sound. Michael reached for my hand, his expression troubled. Mom, what are you saying? That you want to sue us? Sue the hospital? I looked at my children, Michael, who had never lost faith, and Emily, who had given up too easily. The answer wasn't simple. What I wanted wasn't just compensation for material losses. I wanted recognition of what had been done to me. I wanted my daughter to truly understand the weight of her decision. I want justice, I said simply, and my life back. Whatever's left of it. The transition from rehabilitation center to Michael's home came with a host of new challenges. The guest room had been hastily converted to accommodate my needs. A hospital bed replacing the daybed, grab bars installed in the bathroom, furniture rearranged to create wheelchair paths. It was functional but sterile, lacking any trace of the warmth that had defined my own home. Michael had hired a home health aide, Teresa, who came 6 hours daily to assist with the tasks I still couldn't manage independently. She was efficient and kind, but her presence was another reminder of my diminished state. The indignities continued, needing help to bathe, to dress, to navigate the most basic bodily functions. But at least now I could voice my preferences, assert some small control over how these intimate acts were performed. Would you prefer the blue sweater or the green one today, Mrs. Fletcher? Teresa would ask, offering me choices wherever possible, small dignities that helped preserve what remained of my self-respect. Emily visited weekly, her manner still strained with guilt. She brought flowers, books, small offerings that felt like penance. Our conversations remained superficial until one rainy Tuesday afternoon when Michael was at work and Teresa had stepped out to run errands. I spoke with a lawyer, Emily said abruptly, setting aside the magazine she'd been pretending to read. About revering the power of attorney. I looked up from the adaptive tablet Michael had bought to help me communicate more easily. Good, he says it's straightforward given your cognitive recovery. She twisted her hands in her lap. I also asked about the house. My heart quickened. My house, the sale hasn't officially closed. There's a 60-day escrow period. She met my eyes for the first time in weeks. We could back out, there would be penalties, but it's possible. The possibility of reclaiming my home, my garden, the space that had been mine and Robert's sent a surge of hope through me. Then reality intruded. Wheelchair, I said, gesturing to my mobility device. Stairs, bathroom too small, Emily nodded. I've researched that too. There are companies that specialize in home modifications for accessibility. Ramps, stair lifts, bathroom renovations. It would be expensive, but between your insurance and what's left in the trust, it's doable. I studied my daughter's face, searching for her motivation. Was this genuine remorse or merely an attempt to assuage her guilt? Why now? I asked. Emily's composure cracked. Because I can't live with what I did to you, what I almost did. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I thought I was being practical, making the hard decisions, but I was wrong, so wrong. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right if you'll let me. The rawness of her emotion felt genuine. Still, forgiveness wasn't something I could offer easily, not when the wounds were still so fresh. I need to think, I told her. She nodded, wiping her eyes. Take all the time you need, the offer stands. She hesitated, then added, there's something else you should know about your savings. My wariness returned. What about them? The trust we established after selling the house and paying medical bills, it was for $300,000, not $200. The discrepancy made me sit straighter. Where's the rest? Emily couldn't meet my eyes. I borrowed against it for Jake's tuition. I was going to pay it back when my bonus came through, but then you woke up and everything changed, and I just haven't had a chance to make it right. The betrayal stung anew. Not content with selling my house and dividing my possessions, Emily had helped herself to my money as well. You stole from me, I said, my voice hard despite its weakness. I didn't think of it that way at the time, she admitted. I thought you were never coming back, that you want to help your grandson, but you're right, it was wrong. I've already transferred the funds back into the trust with interest. I closed my eyes, suddenly exhausted by the endless revelations of how completely my life had been dismantled during my absence from it. When Michael came home that evening, I asked to speak with him privately. Teresa helped me to the living room sofa, then discreetly withdrew to give us space. Emily visited, I began. Michael nodded. She told me she was coming. How did it go? She says we can stop the house sale. Get it back. His eyebrows rose. That's possible. I thought the deal was done. 60-day escrow, not final yet. I paused, gathering strength for the longer sentences I wanted to express. She also confessed to taking money from my trust for Jake. Michael's expression darkened. She did what? How much? 100,000. He swore under his breath. I'm the trustee. I should have been watching more closely. I'm so sorry, Mom. She says she paid it back with interest. I'll verify that first thing tomorrow. He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture so like his father that it made my heart ache. Do you want the house back? We'd need to make substantial modifications. Did I? The question had been circling in my mind since Emily left. The house represented independence, continuity, the life I'd built with Robert, but it also represented a past that no longer existed. The Martha who had lived there was gone. I need to see it, I decided. Before they close, need to know if it still feels like home. 2 days later, Michael drove me to the house I'd lived in for 40 years. The spring roses I'd planted were blooming without my tending them. The mailbox Robert had hand-painted still stood at the end of the drive. The sight brought a lump to my throat. Inside, most of the furniture was gone, giving the rooms an echoing emptiness. Michael wheeled me slowly through the spaces that had once been so comfortably navigable, but now presented a series of obstacles. Thresholds too high for the wheelchair, hallways too narrow, the second floor completely inaccessible. In the kitchen, I ran my hand along the countertop where I'd prepared thousands of family meals. In the living room, I stared at the corner where our Christmas tree had stood each December. In what had been our bedroom, I closed my eyes and could almost sense Robert's presence. Well, Michael asked gently when we'd completed the tour. The answer came with surprising clarity. It's not home anymore, just a house. He squeezed my shoulder. Are you sure? I nodded. Too many changes needed, too much money, and too many ghosts. We left the house that had sheltered my happiest memories and my deepest sorrows. As Michael drove away, I didn't look back. Sometimes moving forward meant letting go of the past, even the parts worth treasuring. That evening, I made 2 decisions. First, I would not fight to reclaim the house. Second, I would pursue legal action to revoke the power of attorney and regain control of my finances. The elder law attorney Emily had consulted, Mr. Greenberg, came to Michael's house the following week. He was a kind-faced man in his 60s who spoke to me directly, not through Michael, a courtesy I'd come to appreciate. Mrs. Fletcher, I've reviewed your medical records and current cognitive assessments, he said after the preliminaries. Based on the documentation, I see no reason why you shouldn't regain legal control of your affairs. The court typically favors autonomy whenever possible. How long? I asked. To revoke the current power of attorney and establish you as your own legal representative again? A few weeks, assuming no complications. He paused. However, I should mention that pursuing damages against the hospital or your family members would be considerably more complex. I shook my head. Not suing the hospital. They did their best with the information they had. And your family? He asked carefully. I considered the question. The damage Emily had done was undeniable, the betrayal still raw, yet what would litigation accomplish except to permanently fracture an already damaged relationship? Just want control back, I decided. My money, my decisions, start over from here. Mr. Greenberg nodded, seeming relieved. I think that's wise. Families torn apart by lawsuits rarely heal. The legal process moved forward with surprising speed. 6 weeks after Mr. Greenberg's visit, I was declared legally competent to manage my own affairs. The power of attorney was revoked. The trust was dissolved, and the remaining funds, approximately $270,000 after all medical expenses, were placed under my control. It wasn't the retirement fund I'd spent decades building, but it was enough to move forward. Enough to consider options beyond living in Michael's guest room indefinitely. Emily continued her campaign of atonement, researching accessible housing options, looking into rehabilitation programs, even offering to convert her home office into a ground-floor bedroom for me. I accepted her help but maintained emotional distance. Forgiveness, I was discovering, wasn't a single decision but a process, one that might take months or years. One afternoon, as Teresa helped me with exercises to strengthen my right side, she mentioned that her sister worked at a senior living community that had recently opened a rehabilitation wing. They have independent apartments with full accessibility features, she explained, plus on-site therapy services and medical support if needed. My sister says it's really nice, not institutional at all. The possibility of a space that was truly mine, not Michael's guest room, not Emily's converted office, sparked something I hadn't felt in months: hope. The next day, I asked Michael to take me to tour the facility. The Oaks was not what I'd imagined. The apartments were modern and bright, designed specifically for residents with mobility challenges. The community areas bustled with activity. Most importantly, it offered independence with safety nets, the ability to live autonomously while having assistance available when needed. "What do you think?" Michael asked as we completed the tour. I said slowly, "this could be my fresh start." Moving into my apartment at the Oaks marked the beginning of my third life. My first had ended with the stroke. My second had been the months of recovery and reclamation. This third life would be defined by what I chose to make of it, limitations and all. The one-bedroom unit was modest but meticulously designed for someone with mobility challenges. Doorways wide enough for a wheelchair. A roll-in shower with grab bars. Kitchen counters at varying heights to accommodate sitting or standing. The space was neutral when I arrived, but within weeks I had begun to make it mine. Michael helped me retrieve items from storage: my reading lamp, the quilt Robert's mother had made, framed family photos. Emily contributed by finding a local nursery that would deliver potted plants for my small balcony, knowing how I missed my garden. Small touches of my previous life, carefully curated to fit this new, condensed version. Independence came in stages. First, mastering the daily routine with minimal assistance. Then, navigating the building's common areas on my own. Eventually, venturing out using the community's transportation service. Each small victory rebuilt a fraction of the confidence that had been shattered along with my body. The therapies continued: physical, occupational, speech. Progress was measured in increments so tiny they might have seemed inconsequential to an outside observer. The ability to hold a pen steadily enough to write my name. The strength to stand for 30 seconds unassisted. The clarity to complete a complex sentence without searching for words. Through it all, my relationship with my children remained complicated. Michael visited weekly, bringing groceries and updates about Jake's college adventures. Our bond had only strengthened through adversity. Emily, however, remained on the periphery, her visits brief and tension-filled despite her continued efforts at atonement. 6 months after moving to the Oaks, I had an unexpected visitor. Camille, the night nurse who had first recognized my consciousness, appeared at my door one Sunday afternoon. "Mrs. Fletcher," she said, smiling broadly. "Look at you." I invited her in, oddly nervous to be seen in this new context, as if being observed outside the clinical setting might somehow diminish the progress I'd made. "You look wonderful," she said, settling into the armchair across from my wheelchair. "The therapy must be going well." "Slow," I admitted, "but steady. I can stand for short periods now, take a few steps with the walker." "That's amazing progress considering where you started." She surveyed the apartment with approval. "This place suits you much better than that dreary facility." We talked for over an hour, her presence a comfortable reminder of the one person who had seen me when everyone else had looked through me. Before leaving, she handed me a small gift bag. "I brought you something," she said. "A graduation present of sorts." Inside was a travel guide to Paris. I looked up, confused. "I can't possibly." "Not tomorrow," she agreed. "But eventually. They have accessible tour now, you know. Paris for people with mobility challenges." I looked it up. The thought seemed so absurd that I laughed. "I can barely manage a trip to the dining room." "For now," she said firmly. "But you're not done recovering, Mrs. Fletcher. And even if this," she gestured to my wheelchair, "is permanent, it doesn't mean Paris is impossible. Just different than you imagined." After she left, I found myself paging through the guide, studying images of the Eiffel Tower, Notre Dame, the Louvre. The dream I'd abandoned after the stroke. The trip Robert and I had postponed until it was too late. That night I made a decision. My recovery thus far had been focused on reclaiming what was lost: mobility, speech, independence. Perhaps it was time to focus instead on creating something new. A future not defined by what had been taken, but by what remained possible. The next day, I contacted a travel agency that specialized in accessible international tour. The price was steep, but my remaining savings could cover it. The planning would take months, the preparations extensive, but I set a date. 1 year from now, I would go to Paris. When I shared my decision with my children, their reactions were predictably different. Michael was immediately supportive, offering to accompany me if needed. Emily was hesitant, concerned about the physical challenges and distance from medical care. "It's my decision," I reminded her. "My money, my life." She flinched slightly at the reference to financial independence, a reminder of past transgressions. "Of course it is, I just worry." "I know you do," I acknowledged. "But I need this, something to work toward, something that's just for me." In the months that followed, the Paris trip became my North Star. On days when therapy was particularly grueling, I would think of navigating Parisian streets. When speech exercises frustrated me, I practiced basic French phrases instead of the repetitive drills. The future pulled me forward when the present felt too difficult to bear. By the 9-month mark after moving to the Oaks, I had graduated from a wheelchair to a walker for most indoor activities. My speech, while still slower than before, had regained much of its clarity and complexity. The right side of my body remained weaker than the left, but function had returned to a degree no one had thought possible. Dr. Brannigan, who continued to monitor my progress, called it remarkable. "Your dedication to recovery is inspiring, Mrs. Fletcher." "Not dedication," I corrected him. "Stubbornness," he smiled. "Whatever you call it, it's working." As the date of the Paris trip approached, preparations intensified. Passport renewal, travel insurance, medication management plans, consultations with my medical team about navigating the challenges of international travel with mobility impairments. Through it all, Emily remained distant despite her surface-level support. The fracture between us had not healed, merely scabbed over. One evening, after helping me assemble a packing list, she finally addressed the elephant that had occupied the room for over a year. "Do you think you'll ever forgive me?" she asked quietly. I set aside the travel brochure I'd been reviewing. "For what exactly? The treatment decision, selling the house, taking my money?" She flinched. "All of it, any of it." "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Some days I think I have. Other days the anger feels as fresh as when I first heard you tell the doctor to let me go." "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered. "I truly thought I was doing what you would want." "That's the problem," I said. "You decided what I would want instead of fighting for what I might need. You gave up too easily, Emily. That's harder to forgive than the house or the money." Tears filled her eyes. "What can I do to make it right?" "You can't," I told her, the truth of it sharp but necessary. "Some things can't be undone. But going forward, you can remember that as long as someone is breathing, there's hope. That's what Michael understood that you didn't." She nodded, accepting the painful truth. "Will you let me come to Paris with you? Not to hover or interfere, just to be there in case you need anything." The request surprised me. It would mean taking time off work, arranging care for her own family. It was perhaps the most sincere offering she could make. Not money or things, but presence and support when I embarked on this challenging journey. "I'll think about it," I promised, unwilling to close the door completely. 2 weeks before the scheduled departure, Michael invited both Emily and me to dinner at his home. There, he unveiled a surprise, a custom-made travel journal bound in soft leather with my initials embossed on the cover. "For your adventure," he said, placing it in my hands. "To record everything." The gift touched me deeply, not just for its thoughtfulness but for what it represented. His belief in my ability to not only make this journey but to come back with stories worth telling. That night, back in my apartment, I made my final decision about Emily. The next morning, I called her. "If you still want to come to Paris," I said when she answered, "you can, but not as my caretaker, as my daughter." Her exhale was audible through the phone. "Thank you, Mom. I promise you won't regret it." "I might," I countered, unwilling to offer false assurances. "But I'm willing to find out." 1 year and 3 months after the stroke that nearly claimed my life, I boarded a plane bound for Paris. Michael came to the airport to see us off, hugging me carefully before I made my way down the jet bridge, Emily following with our carry-on bags. The flight was long and uncomfortable despite the accommodations the airline had made. By the time we landed at Charles de Gaulle, I was exhausted and in pain, questioning the wisdom of this entire endeavor. But then, emerging from the airport into the Parisian morning, something shifted. The air felt different. The light, the sounds, the sense of being somewhere entirely new. It awakened something that had been dormant since the stroke. The accessible van took us to our hotel in the 7th arrondissement, chosen specifically for its proximity to the Eiffel Tower. After resting, we ventured out for our first Parisian experience. A simple café lunch on a terrace with a view of the Seine. As the waiter set a glass of champagne before me, I realized Camille was beside me in spirit. She had been right. This trip was different than I had imagined with Robert all those years ago. The pace was slower, the accommodations more carefully considered, the assistance more necessary. But the essence, the joy of finally experiencing this city I dreamed of, remained intact. I raised my glass, first toward Emily in cautious acknowledgement of our fragile reconciliation, then toward the sky in silent tribute to Robert, who should have been here, and finally to myself, to the woman who had heard her daughter end her treatment, who had clawed her way back from the edge of oblivion, who had refused to accept the limitations others tried to impose. The champagne was perfectly chilled, its effervescence tickling my tongue as I took a small sip. Some wounds would never fully heal. Some betrayals would always leave scars. But in that moment, sitting in a Parisian cafe with the autumn sun warming my face, I was profoundly, undeniably alive. And that perhaps was the greatest victory of all.